Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about continuing impediments to the start of an intra-Afghan dialogue. Last Saturday, Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani appointed a Council for National Reconciliation, which will have the final say on whether the government will sign a peace deal with the Taliban after what are expected to be protracted and uncertain negotiations. The 46-member council is led by his former rival in last year's presidential election, Dr. Abdullah, who is now in government. The council is separate from a 21-member negotiating team which Ghani appointed in March and which is expected to travel to Qatar, where the Taliban maintain a political office. The council will have the final say and ultimately decide on the points that the negotiating team takes up with the Taliban. The council may not sit well with the Taliban, who have appointed just one 20-member negotiating team that has the authority to make final decisions. The Taliban team answers only to their leader, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada. There are also other obstacles in the way. The Afghan government has reversed a decision to release the last 320 Taliban prisoners until Taliban free more captured soldiers. US troops have already started leaving Afghanistan, and by November, fewer than 5,000 troops are expected to still be in the country. That's down from nearly 13,000 when the US-Taliban agreement was signed on 29 February earlier this year. Under the agreement, the withdrawal of US troops does not hinge on the success of intra-Afghan talks, but on commitments made by the Taliban to combat terrorist groups and ensure Afghanistan is not used as a staging ground for attacks on the US and its allies. Meanwhile, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who signed a peace deal with Ghani in 2016, has said that India is acting as a spoiler in Afghanistan. To discuss this further, we have with us David Sedney, Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Mariam Wardak, who's a journalist and activist in Kabul. Let me begin with Mariam here. Mariam, there are a number of questions. Firstly, I think it would be important for you to give our viewers a sense of why this separate council, or a council separate from the negotiating team. What exactly is this? Something political, or what is this about?
I believe that the 21 people that were originally selected to become the negotiation team bear too much responsibility to represent the whole nation. Aside from that, there was political influence, because if you reflect on the list of the new committee, they are strongly political influence individuals. And these individuals do not get along with one another either. A majority of them have a past of becoming being a jihadi leader. So I believe that it was a political decision, and also in the sense that it would be a wider representation. Whether this representation is accurate or not is another discussion. However, I believe they wanted to put less pressure on the negotiation team as well.
No, but hold on, Mariam, I perfectly get what you're saying, and I think that's an important point. But since you mentioned that these are people, and you rightly said, as a matter of fact, you have people like Sayaf there, and you have, other people, the jihadis, and there's a lot of blood on their hands. And you also said that they don't particularly, get along with each other, as you put it. Then that means that there's going to be a lot of infighting, and it'll be extremely difficult to find a convergence on the agenda for talks.
Yes, absolutely. One of the discussions that we hear on the ground, especially from analysts and average citizens in Afghanistan, is how are these people going to come together and come to an agreement, especially when it comes to somebody that they have been fighting for so long. We don't know if there's a mechanism in place. Many people are asking if there's going to be a technical mechanism in place. On top of that, the 8 females that they have selected are also not very strong females. How are they going to be able to raise their voice on sensitive matters when it comes to gender empowerment or gender access or equality?
I believe there are nine women in the team. But stay with me, Mariam. Let me go to David Sedney here. David, what is your reading of this?
That's a really difficult thing to do because these various factions, these various groupings have very different ideas of what the present and past were, and even more different ideas about what the future should be. So it's not going to be possible for just one group or one part of the Afghan political spectrum to come to an agreement. And so this announcement by President Ghani is an effort to try and bring in those people who are often seen as spoilers, those who would often seen as not willing to engage in peace at all. So bringing them into the peace process, I think, is a step forward. But there is a danger.
David, I understand what you're saying. But if you give the council effective veto on what the negotiating team is going to do, and if the council also has, is fractious, then where would the process go?
The process is going to be slow and hard, just like every other peace process from this kind of conflict over hundreds of years has been. It won't be easy. It'll be hard. And it won't be fast. It'll be slow. But by including all the various stakeholders in the way that have been, the chances of a lasting peace are greater. But the odds against these negotiations have always been high. It's always been a real question as to whether they're going to be able to get going, because there is not really a consensus within Afghan society about what the future should be. That's why they're fighting a civil war about this.
I perfectly understand. No one ever thought there's going to be a cakewalk. As a matter of fact, remember, you've probably been on programs where we've discussed that despite all the ups and downs of the talks between Taliban and the United States, that was perhaps an easier phase of the talk. So there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that it's going to be very tough. My point, and I want to stress it once again, is that reconciliation is, of course, important, and there are disparate, factions. But that is something that could have been done separately from how Kabul was going to negotiate with the Taliban, because you've also had a Loya Jirga. Loya Jirga put out a resolution. Some of those basic issues in terms of what the Taliban are supposed to do have already been agreed upon. But if you get the council to actually veto what the negotiating team is going to do, then you're throwing a spanner in the works even before the works begin.
I think I respectfully disagree with you. I think it is absolutely vital that these various groups and interest groups, and even more of them, be included in the process as it goes along. This is not going to be a situation where a small group of people are going to come to an agreement with the Taliban and come and force it down the throats of the Afghan people. They have to be part of the process at the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And you mentioned agreements. There have been no agreements between the Afghan government and the Taliban, only agreements between the U.S. and the Taliban.
No, I was talking about the U.S. Taliban, not the Kabul Taliban agreements.
Those agreements are really irrelevant to what the Afghan government might agree to. It's very clear the U.S., in its haste to withdraw, has made statements to the Taliban, made comments to the Taliban, included language in their withdrawal agreement that the Afghan government and Afghan people would reject. So the Taliban are in a tough position because they think they've achieved something with the discussions with the United States that they've not really achieved.
Right. You heard what Sedney said. Frankly, my point still stands with reference to the idea of giving veto, a virtual veto power to the council, because, as I said, that makes the task of the negotiating team even harder. What's your take on that?
Any democratic process is going to have multiple phases, and I think President Ghani is trying to ensure that he's acting equally and in an unbiased manner. However, I am concerned about the fact that there is no youth representation in the team when 70% of the country is below the age of 30. Aside from that, including political figures is okay, but including jihadi figures who have blood on their hands is a concern in the fact that if we're trying to change the face of the nation and trying to move forward from all of the tragedies that Afghans have faced, how are we to be sure that this will not continue? The spoiler effect is very high. Afghans know this better than anybody else. However, giving a process, a reconciliation process, what mechanism is there in place? Have they placed any mechanisms? None of this information is out for the public to understand what the process will be. This is where the concern lies. This is where many of the Afghans don't understand the process. And these are Afghans mainly in the urban areas. The rural areas are not really much involved in not discussing this. It's many of the urban areas because they're going to be the ones that are going to be affected the most because they are the ones that have the ability to move around freely and act as they wish. However, now, putting this into place, when the 21-member negotiation team returns, comes back and assesses with this committee, maybe we will be surprised. Maybe some of these political leaders do want the best interest in the country and they want the bloodshed too. And we have no idea. We can't be as critical, but we can be concerned. And the concern that I see on the ground here is, why are the jihadi leaders back? Why are the same people that have been in power for the past 20 years represented? And why are the youth not represented? So when you look at the 21-member team, you have only one face, who is Atta Muhammad Noor's son, Khalid Noor, who is the youth. And then in this larger team, you don't have any youth representation.
Right. That's an important point. David, give me your sense of this, again, the reversal of the prisoner swap issue.
The Afghan government by the United States, they've never bought into it. And the commandos in particular are a force that is highly respected among the Afghan people. And so this, essentially the refusal of the Taliban to release these prisoners when at the same time they went out and kidnapped other people in order to release them to reach the numerical target of 1,000. So yes, it is political, but it's political that I think has a lot of support in the Afghan polity, and it's again part of the preparation for the discussions. The Taliban said they wouldn't move until all their named prisoners were released, and now the Afghan government is saying, well, we have to have these 30 commandos released. So is this going to delay the start? Probably. Is it something that's going to be able to be worked through? I think so, but it'll take some time and effort.
Right. Think of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's statement with reference to India.
I don't really see Gulbuddin Hekmatyar as a political analyst, so I really not really sure what he's talking about. I personally have not seen any evidence of India playing a spoiler.
No, but what I want to ask you, of course, is that what approach is Gulbuddin taking? I mean, he's not just throwing something out just for the heck of it. I mean, what's the play here?
Gulbuddin got a very small percentage of the vote in the presidential elections. He doesn't really have much support. I think it's probably partly an effort by him to get publicity and to play a bigger role than it's probably merited by the small number of supporters he actually has. Okay.
There is also a sense, we seem to agree on the fact that these are going to be, it's going to be a long haul and pretty tortuous kind of process. So this will go on past the US presidential elections. Now, in the event that there is a new administration, do you think as far as the US troop withdrawal is concerned and also the intra-Afghan dialogue is concerned, that the new administration is likely to sort of skate close to what is happening on the ground and what has been agreed upon? Or do you think there could be a change?
There's a pretty wide consensus in the United States supporting the withdrawal of combat troops. I think there might be some of the specifics of the deal that Ambassador Khalilzad reached that a new administration might want to examine. But the core issue of pulling U.S. combat forces out, I don't think there's much, I don't think there's really any likelihood of that changing. In terms of how the U.S. approaches support of intra-Afghan talks, the U.S. will be supportive. The new U.S. administration will be supportive of those talks too. But whether they keep Ambassador Khalilzad on or put a new special negotiator in, all of those things will remain to be seen. Afghanistan is not really a major issue. I can't even call it a minor issue so far in the U.S. election. So I think it's something that will have to wait to be determined in January and February.
Right. Thank you so much. David S. Sedney speaking with us. Before I wrap up quickly, we've got Mariam back. Mariam, one final question and quick answer. So Sedney was just saying that even if there is a new administration in the United States, as far as the troop withdrawal is concerned, there's a general sort of consensus that that's going to happen. Now, in the event, and I'm just sort of, speculating the worst case scenario, in the event that intra-Afghan dialogue does not go anywhere and the country goes back to violence, how are the Afghans going to survive or sustain that kind of scenario? And how would the U.S. respond, having already withdrawn?
I think violence is not the answer, and it would turn into an unfortunate circumstance, not only for Afghanistan, but the region and the world community as a whole. Afghanistan is in a very fragile state, and if our international allies don't observe this whole process very quickly and intervene if this process does not, if it falls through, then Afghanistan once again could be a possible area for threat for the entire world community. I would also like to mention just right now that there was a statement out by Abdullah rejecting this new council of Ashraf Ghani, stating that this needs to be a national reconciliation process and needs to be elected and representing of the whole country. So it seems like there's many disagreements on top, and we're trying to include all parties and making sure that everybody that are powerful are included in the process. But we have to once again reflect that it's not the powerful people that might stay longer to run the country. It really is the youth. And we have to reflect in the best nature and what we're going to propose to the young Afghanistan that is growing right now.
But thank you, Mariam, for breaking this new development, because frankly, what Dr. Abdullah seems to be saying is something that I was also talking about in part in terms of having the reconciliation process done separately from the negotiating team. So I think without knowing what Dr. Abdullah was thinking, I think I was thinking along the same lines. But thank you so much for being on the program. As always, we shall take a short break and return to discuss whether U.S. sanctions could put China's Sri Lanka project in trouble. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about the fate of Colombo Port City project. The U.S. has sanctioned Chinese companies involved in building artificial islands in South China Sea, an action that may affect the fate of several of Beijing's under-construction BRI projects, including the strategically sensitive Port City Colombo project. India and other Western countries had tried in vain to dissuade Sri Lanka from handing over the Colombo Port City project in its southwest to China. Chinese companies had earlier completed the Hambantota port in the southeast. This has helped China establish lookouts on both flanks of Sri Lanka overlooking the Indian Ocean. But the new development might force Colombo to rethink handing the project to a Chinese company. To discuss this further, we are joined by Professor Larus, Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at the University of Mary, Washington, and Shihar Aneez, former senior correspondent at Reuters. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Professor Larus here. Professor Larus, there's also a sense that this executive fiat, if it becomes law, is expected to be more well-rounded, since there is a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. on containing China. Is that sense correct?
Hot topic now is, of course, China's reclamation projects in the South China Sea. China has reclaimed over 3,000 acres over like at least seven structures in the South China Sea. And you know that Secretary of State Pompeo recently said that the United States would not allow the South China Sea to turn into part of China's empire. And so you see the sanctions on the China Communications Construction Company for its activities in these land reclamation projects, because these projects are on disputed territory. 5 other countries also claim these territories as their own, and Pompeo in the United States argues that the Chinese Communications Construction Company is not only engaged in the Port Colombo project, the Hamabototo project, projects in Kenya, really around the world, but also that they're helping the PLA, the China's military, possibly militarize these these areas that have been reclaimed from the sea by China.
Professor Larus, let me these are arguments that, of course, have been put out. And we all know this. But here's the major problem with the U.S. approach here for countries around the world, including Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka is not the only country that is part of the BRI, broader BRI project, which is that the U.S. policy is hampering and limiting, other states from doing what they think is in their interest. In this case, Sri Lanka saying, well, we don't want to give it to anyone else. We want to give it to a Chinese company. Now, as I was saying about this executive fiat, which if it becomes a law, there is a possibility, and this is by people quoting U.S. officials as saying that a future law could even bar third country companies from partnering with Chinese companies. So this creates a major problem for other states.
It does. It certainly does. As a matter of fact, the foreign minister of the Philippines came out following the announcement and said that the Philippines might have to reconsider projects that it has under contract with the China Communications Construction Company, and that in all likelihood, China would sue back for breach of contract. So it does open up a host of problems there regarding breaches of contract. But the United States, it doesn't see it that way. The United States, again, sees a company that is enabling China to build on disputed territories. Also keep in mind that this company, CCCC, right, China Communications Construction Company, has been blackmailed by the World Bank for corruption, for non-bidding, on projects, and a host of other things. So it's not just the United States.
Professor Larus, agree, but there are lots of other Western companies, U.S. companies that have come under the radar, so we won't go there. The corporate sector is riddled with all sorts of practices that, unless people get caught, go under the radar. But my point, and I want to stress that point, has to do with the fact that China is bringing in investment. No one else does. I mean, the United States, for instance, let me take the example of Pakistan. The former Assistant Secretary of State, Alice Wells, when she was in Pakistan, she talked openly against CPEC. And when she was asked, would you be prepared to invest? There's no response. So unless the United States can actually come and do things that China wants to do, other states, frankly, will begin to look at these U.S. actions as very narrowly focused on U.S. interests and against the interests of not just one state, but multiple states.
The Colombo project, has actually been delayed a couple of times. Even that is a controversial project in Sri Lanka. The previous government had wanted to start with it in 2014, and then there was a change in government and said, wait a minute, not so fast, because, it was a question if Sri Lanka would get into debt the way that the Hambantota project went off. Now, the big difference is, admittedly, that the Colombo project is primarily FDI, that is, it's Chinese investment rather than loans. But like the Hambantota project, the Colombo project gives China a lease for 99 years. And the change, when the government changed in Sri Lanka, the government there took exception to that and said, wait, let's rethink this thing. And so they did some renegotiations, and then the project was back on again in 2016. And then, of course, we know it stopped a bit because of coronavirus.
Professor Larus, those are details that have to, that basically are about the internal political fault lines and debates within Sri Lanka. My point is larger than that. Now, CCCC is being branded as the Huawei of construction. We've seen what has happened with Huawei. We've seen what is happening with TikTok. So it's not about the smaller tactical pieces. I'm talking about the larger strategic picture. But stay with me. Let me pull in Mr. Aneez here. Mr. Aneez, I want to get your reading of this.
Yeah, I think what you have said was correct. Several projects in Sri Lanka, first they approach many countries, including India. So when they say they can't, sometimes they are compelled to go for China. For instance, specific Hambantota project, it was originally given to, India was invited for this project. And there was no response, so India didn't want to do that. And then China happily agreed to do this project. That's one. And the Colombo Port City as well. So I think, as you said, China grabbed the opportunity, and they come up with money. And there was a time from 2010 to 2014 where nobody was willing to invest in Sri Lanka because of its human rights record in the final phase of the 30-year war. And then China came in a big way to invest and give loan in big way to the government. Because of some differences between the government change, there was some delay, that's true. But still the project is going on. Now, about the sanction by the US, I think the government so far has not responded to this. But I think they might rethink, not the government, but the subsidiary of CCCC. So basically, the project goes as there is a Sri Lankan registered company which is kind of inviting for investments. So that might rethink its strategy if the sanction is going to have an impact on the investments. It's kind of $25 to $30 billion investment they are expecting for this port city alone.
Right. So, as Professor was saying, there are, of course, internal, conversations in Sri Lanka, and I'm assuming that there would be people opposed to this port project or opposed to handing over the port project to a Chinese company. Give us some sense of what those conversations are.
Well, there are two sides of it. One is there is a fraction which always say, we should not sell the country to outside party, or they are against privatization. And the past experience of leasing or privatization is not that great in Sri Lanka. So with that experience, they always say we shouldn't do that. And the government, which was from 2010 to 2015, was in that with that sentiment. They never wanted to kind of privatize, but they went. They were ready to 99-year lease. But then the next government came in from 2015 to 2020 or 2019. So they went for this debt to equity strategy. So basically, they gave the Hambantota port for 99-year lease with certain part of ownership for the state-run Sri Lanka Port Authority. So there is a kind of a controversy on, what kind of control Sri Lanka will have on this port. And as you correctly said, there was a question of militarization or bringing in Chinese military. That at that point, China clearly said this is kind of a commercial deal. We will not bring in any military.
But that was a point raised by Professor Larus about militarization. But thank you so much. That was Shihar Aneez speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me go back to Professor Larus. Professor Larus, as I said, I'm trying to raise a broader point. One, it seems fairly clear to me that geopolitics and great power rivalry is, of course, it has trumped, free market. It's trumped the kind of system that was being created under the WTO, because, as you know, if the U.S. had concerns about Chinese companies, there is a dispute resolution mechanism under the WTO. One doesn't really need to take unilateral actions, as the United States has been doing. And many of the actions the U.S. has taken with reference to Huawei and TikTok and the rest are essentially political or geopolitical rather than strictly, concerns of security. So this approach is, as I said earlier, severely hampering the freedom of action of other states, and it's not, frankly, going down well with those states.
Well, let's go back to our opening comments when you had asked me about, the bipartisanship sentiment over China. There is the sentiment on Capitol Hill, as well as in the American public, that past administrations, regardless of Democrat or Republican, have not done enough to respond to China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea and its failure to live up to its WTO commitments. And so President Trump comes along and he's looking and he's saying, okay, we have been played too loosey-goosey, and now we need to do something. And so hence Pompeo's comment which was very, pointed, that the South China Sea will not be part of China's imperial empire, and that we're actually going to do something. We're not just going to talk with Xi Jinping. We're not going to have the toasts and the roasts and the dinners and then the platitudes and then go back to the way things were. So you're dealing with a very different administration here that is saying you are not only reclaiming these territories and these structures in the South China Sea, but you are militarizing them. After Xi Jinping came to the White House and in a press conference in 2015 said, we will not militarize these structures in the South China Sea. So there's not a lot of trust there. So it's not that the United States is targeting CCCC. It is that CCC is the major company that is involved in the land reclamation projects. And therefore, if we sanction the company, then it does affect their projects worldwide, not just in Sri Lanka, but Kenya, Tanzania. I mean, you pick any of the countries.
Everywhere. As a matter of fact, got a lot of these subsidiaries which are in tie-ups with U.S. firms as subcontractors and equipment suppliers, including for the Colombo Port City project. But thank you so much, Professor Larus, for speaking with us. Always a pleasure. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow. Keep following our latest updates on social media at Indus.News. Good night and goodbye.